Hi guys, sorry to interrupt your viewing, but please subscribe to the channel and like this video. Thank you.
It was a Sunday morning like any other, except the church smelled faintly of lilies and baby powder, and every pair of eyes in the first three pews tried too hard to look holy. We stood shoulder to shoulder in stiff outfits, family members packed together like unwilling passengers on a boat headed for nowhere, all pretending to be something close to happy. The priest droned on about rebirth and grace while my arms ached from holding Clare, who had fallen asleep against my chest, breathing in those tiny, snuffly bursts that made something deep in my ribs hurt in a way I hadn't felt before. I could feel Sandra's presence before I heard her voice. My mother stood so close behind me, I could smell her perfume, strong, dated, the kind of scent that filled a room like a warning. She hadn't said much since the ceremony started, just smiled that tight, polished smile she wore at every family function, the kind that made people think she was elegant instead of dangerous. She looked the part of the doting grandmother, soft cashmere sweater, string of pearls, nails filed down to glossy perfection. But beneath the lacquer, the same poison still brewed. I should have known she wouldn't be able to keep it together. Not today, not when the spotlight was on me. Right after the priest said, "Amen," just before the soft murmurs of applause and camera clicks began, she leaned in. Her breath hit the side of my face like ice. "You'll be a terrible mother," she whispered, low enough that only I could hear it. "Just like you were a daughter." For a moment, everything around me paused. The air held still, suspended between her venom and the sting it was meant to cause. I could have turned. I could have said something. Instead, I kissed the top of Claire's head, felt her warm skin under my lips, and said nothing. I have said a lot of nothing to my mother over the years. Silence has always been our loudest language. But this one was different. This one carried weight. It wasn't cowardice. It was a decision. We moved down the steps of the altar, and the priest placed a gentle hand on my shoulder like I needed support. Maybe I did. Not because I believed her words, but because of how familiar they felt. When I was 8 years old, I spilled grape juice on her beige carpet. She didn't yell. She looked at me and said, "You ruin everything you touch." I believed her for 10 years. When I was 13, I came home crying after a boy made fun of my braces. She told me I should be grateful anyone noticed me at all. When I was 17, she found a journal entry where I'd written that I didn't want to live in that house anymore. She read it out loud at dinner. My father said nothing. So no, her whisper didn't shock me. It just confirmed what I already knew. She hadn't changed. And this time, she would not be allowed to win. The church basement was full of plastic tablecloths and lukewarm coffee, and the usual small talk about college tuition and real estate taxes. Claire was passed around like a prize roast, and Sandra smiled for every photo like she hadn't just tried to detonate me 30 minutes ago. She even had the audacity to make a toast. "To my beautiful granddaughter," she said, raising her glass of punch. And to her mother, who finally got something right. There were polite chuckles. Someone muttered, "Oh, Sandra," like she was quirky instead of cruel. My husband, Matt, clenched his jaw but said nothing. He knew the rules. Don't cause a scene. Not here. Not yet. I excused myself to the bathroom and stared at my reflection under flickering fluorescent lights. I looked tired. Not just new mom tired, soul tired. The kind that sinks into your bones and settles there. I thought about the whisper again, the one meant to undo me. I thought about how much power she used to have. How easily she could unspool me with one sentence. But now, there was Claire. I ran my thumb along the line of her cheek later that night, when the house was quiet and the fake smiles were gone. She was perfect. Fragile and new and still unmarked by the world. I made a silent vow in the darkness. She would never feel what I felt. Not if I could help it. I would fail, probably. We all do. But not like Sandra. Never like her. And as I walked past the nursery and into my own room, I whispered to myself, not as a threat, not as a plan, but as a quiet promise with steel in its spine, there are memories I've shoved so far into the back of my mind that I only feel them in flashes. like old film strips melting in the projector, but sometimes, out of nowhere, they come flooding in with the kind of clarity that feels like punishment. I was 5 the first time I remember getting slapped across the face for crying. Not for doing something wrong, not for screaming or breaking something, but simply for crying too loud during church. I had stubbed my toe on the wooden pew and whimpered under my breath, and that was enough. Later, in the car, she didn't yell. She didn't scream. She leaned back from the front seat, looked me dead in the eye, and whispered like she was sharing a secret with God, "You are always embarrassing me." Always. That's the kind of mother Sandra was, the kind who could cut you open with a glance and make you feel like you held the knife. She didn't believe in therapy or apologies or mental health unless it involved someone else's diagnosis, preferably someone she could look down on. When I turned 12 and had my first panic attack in the middle of a school dance, I thought I was dying. My chest clenched, my hands tingled, my ears rang like fire alarms, and when I finally got home and told her what happened, she rolled her eyes and said, "Oh, please. Don't be dramatic. You just want attention." That was the word she always used, dramatic. Not anxious. Not overwhelmed. Not in need of help. Dramatic, like I was putting on a show just to irritate her. You know how some mothers say, "I love you," when you leave the house, or "I'm proud of you," when you graduate high school? Mine said things like, "Try not to screw this up," and "Don't embarrass yourself tonight." I spent most of my teenage years in survival mode, keeping my grades up, keeping my head down, and praying for the day I could get out and breathe air that didn't smell like her perfume and silent disappointment. The thing that gets me now that I have Claire in my arms and I'm responsible for her tiny life, is how easily those voices creep back in. Sandra's voice. Her rules. Her judgments. I swore up and down that I would be different, that I would build a home out of safety and softness, that Claire would never hear the words I heard or cry herself to sleep because of me. But every time I mess up, every time I forget a bottle or lose patience after a sleepless night, I hear Sandra in my head, laughing, whispering, "You're becoming just like me." And the truth is, sometimes I believe it. After the baptism, Sandra started dropping by without calling first. At first it was once a week, just to check in, she said, but then it became more frequent. 3 times a week. Sometimes twice in one day. She'd bring Claire ridiculous gifts, like lace dresses meant for toddlers or hard plastic shoes a newborn couldn't even wear. She'd comment on everything from the way I held the bottle to the temperature in the room. "She's too warm," she'd mutter. "She's too cold. She's going to get lazy if you keep rocking her that much." One afternoon, I came out of the bathroom and found her in the nursery, holding Claire and whispering something just under her breath. I paused in the hallway, listening, and that's when I heard her say it. Poor thing doesn't even know what kind of woman her mother is. She didn't know I was standing there. Or maybe she did. Maybe she wanted me to hear it, wanted to cut me open and watch how I bled. I said nothing. Just walked in, took Claire from her arms, and said, "It's nap time now." She smiled like nothing had happened, like she hadn't just tried to make me feel unworthy of my own child. That was her specialty, poison dipped in sugar. Later that night, I told Matt what happened. He wanted to confront her, wanted to call her and rip into her. But I said no. I wasn't ready to fight, not yet. I needed to be smart. I needed to be patient. I was tired of being the one who exploded while she stood back and looked like the saint. A few days later, she commented on Claire's feeding schedule. 7 ounces every 2 hours, she said, raising an eyebrow like she was reviewing a failed science project. "That's too much. You're going to spoil her stomach. She'll never sleep through the night." I laughed, but not because it was funny. I laughed because I was starting to recognize the script. I mean, it's not like newborns drink 70 ounces a day, right? That would be insane. But she said it with such conviction, like always, and for a second, I almost second-guessed myself. Almost. And then came the moment that snapped something in me clean in half. I was putting away laundry upstairs when I heard drawers opening in our bedroom. At first I thought it was Matt, but he was out getting groceries. I came down the hallway fast, my heart already speeding up, and there she was, standing by my dresser, holding one of my old journals. She had no shame. She didn't even pretend to be sorry. Just looked up and said, "You really shouldn't leave these lying around. Someone could read something that makes them worry about the baby." That's when I knew we had crossed into new territory. This wasn't just judgment anymore. This was invasion. This was sabotage. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel afraid of her. I felt angry, controlled, and ready. She waited a full week before mentioning it, long enough to make me question whether I'd imagined the whole thing, long enough to make me doubt my own sense of reality like she's been training me to do since I was old enough to stand on my own feet. That's how Sandra operates. She doesn't explode. She seeps in through the cracks you forgot to seal. She waits until you're calm, until you think the storm passed, and then she drops the weight with a smile so polite it could get her elected to city council. We were sitting in the kitchen, Clare asleep upstairs, Matt still at work, and she was stirring her tea with that slow, circular rhythm that always meant something was coming. She set the spoon down quietly, folded her hands, and said, "You know, I read something interesting the other day. Something you wrote, actually. About how you once thought about driving off a bridge." There it was. No build-up. No hesitation. Just a casual mention of the ugliest sentence I'd ever scribbled into a journal one winter night during college, when I thought no one would ever understand what it meant to carry so much hurt and feel like you had nowhere to put it. I froze. I didn't speak. I didn't ask her how she found it because I already knew. She'd read the journal. The one she had no right to touch. She must have taken it from the drawer the day I caught her snooping, read it in her car or in bed like it was a damn novel, and now she was using it. She was holding my worst thought hostage, turning my vulnerability into a weapon she could wave in my face when I got too confident, too distant, too much like someone she couldn't control anymore. "I don't remember the exact words," she continued, sipping her tea like she wasn't gutting me with every syllable. "But it scared me, honestly. And now with the baby, I just wonder if you're still having those kinds of thoughts." That wasn't concern. That was manipulation. That was a trap wrapped in faux sympathy, laid out like bait on a polished plate. I looked her straight in the eye, forced my voice to stay calm, and said, "Claire is safe. I am fine." Then I stood up, picked up her empty teacup, and walked it to the sink without another word. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't tell her to get the hell out of my house, though I should have. Instead, I turned my back on her because I'd finally started to understand something important. People like Sandra feed on reaction. And I wasn't giving her any more of me. That night, after she left, I opened a new notebook and started documenting everything. Every text she sent, every voicemail she left, every time she showed up without asking. I wrote down the time, the words, the tone of her voice, even what Claire was doing at the time, because when this blew up, and I knew it would, I wasn't going to let her rewrite the story. Not this time. I remembered something my old therapist used to say during the years I spent trying to untangle Sandra's mess from the parts of me that were still salvageable. "You can't win with a narcissist," she told me. "But you can starve them. You can stop feeding the performance." So I did. I stopped texting back the same day she brought up the journal. I canceled the lunch we were supposed to have 2 days later. When she texted, "Guess you're too busy to see your own mother," I didn't respond. When she left a voicemail saying she was worried and just wanted to check in, I deleted it without listening to the end. I started putting my phone on Do Not Disturb at 6 every night, and I made sure Matt knew. If she called, I didn't want to hear about it. Of course, she noticed. And of course, she didn't like it. She started pushing harder. More surprise visits, more gifts, more pointed comments through mutual friends about how withdrawn I'd become. At one point, she even left a book on postpartum depression in my mailbox, no note, just the title screaming at me like an accusation. I didn't even touch it. Just threw it in the trash, still shrink-wrapped. But the silence, the space I was carving between us, it started to feel like breathing. Like I was stepping out of a burning room for the first time in my life. And then, a week after her little journal stunt, she came by again. I heard her car pull up in the driveway while I was feeding Claire, and I stayed seated, didn't move a muscle. I watched the baby, watched her tiny lips work the bottle, felt her heartbeat against my arm, and I didn't even flinch when the doorbell rang. She rang twice, then knocked, then stood there, waiting. I let her wait. When she finally tried the door handle, she found it locked. For the first time in my life, that door was locked with her on the other side. And I swear I could feel her confusion through the wood. It started with a piece of paper so ordinary that, under any other circumstance, I wouldn't have remembered it by the time I tossed it into the trash. It was a simple form, something Claire's pediatrician's office handed me during our routine checkup. The nurse smiled like it was nothing and said, "We're just updating emergency contacts. Shouldn't take more than a minute." I nodded, tucked the clipboard under my arm, and sat down with Claire bouncing on my lap, her tiny fingers wrapped around one of mine like she was anchoring me to something real. The first few lines were easy: name, birth date, address, insurance info, same as always. Then I got to the section marked, "In case of emergency, please list contacts who may be called if the parent or legal guardian is unavailable." It was a standard line, written in friendly font, asking for something that seemed so basic and obvious. It should have been automatic. I had written my mother's name on that line for years, during pregnancy, after delivery, at every doctor's office and daycare, and errand that required a fallback. It had always been there. Because that's what people do, right? You list your mother. You list the woman who raised you, who knows your blood type and your birthday and the name of your first grade teacher. You list her because you're supposed to. Even when you hate her. Even when you're terrified of what she'll do with that information. But this time, my hand didn't move. The pen hovered above the line. My fingers tightened around it like it had suddenly grown heavy, like the decision I was about to make would shift something permanent inside me. And I realized that it would. I didn't write her name. I wrote Matt's first, of course, because he's the only person I trust completely with our daughter's life. And then I wrote Kelsey, my best friend since college, the one who drove me to the hospital when my water broke and held my hand when the contractions were still too far apart to mean anything but hurt. She knows how to hold Claire, how to soothe her, how to make her laugh in that hiccupy way that makes the whole world feel softer. She's not blood, but she's family. When I handed the form back to the nurse, my hands were steady. It was the smallest decision. A name on a line, a simple omission. But it felt like setting a boundary so firm it echoed inside my chest. I didn't need to announce it. I didn't need to explain it. I didn't need Sandra's permission or forgiveness or approval. I just needed to not put her name down. 2 weeks later, she showed up again, without warning, as usual, carrying a pastel-colored gift bag stuffed with tissue paper and the kind of rattle that looks expensive but breaks after a week. I was standing in the doorway, Claire in my arms, blocking the threshold like I'd started doing every time she came by. She smiled that strange smile and said, "I didn't get the reminder call for Claire's next checkup. Did they forget to update my number or something?" I didn't blink. I didn't falter. "Nope," I said. "You're not on the list anymore." Her smile didn't fall. Not right away. But something in her face changed. It tightened, like a mask slipping into place. She didn't ask why. She didn't make a scene. She just nodded once, her lips pressing into a line so thin it almost disappeared. "I see," she said. Then handed me the bag, turned around, and walked back to her car. I stood there for a long time after she left, Claire's head nestled against my shoulder, the gift bag dangling from my wrist like a burden I hadn't asked for. I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel proud, either. I just felt quiet. And calm. And for the first time in months, I felt like maybe I was actually doing something right. Later that night, after Claire was asleep and the house was dark except for the hallway light we always leave on, I listened to a new voicemail from Sandra. The tone was different. Not pitiful. Not pretending. Just sharp. Calculated. "You'll regret this," she said, voice low and even. "Don't forget I know things. I remember everything you wrote in that little diary. I didn't delete it. Not this time. I saved it. And then I played it again. because I needed to remember exactly how far she was willing to go. I listened to the voicemail only once, and even that felt like one too many times, like brushing my fingers against a flame just to see if it would still hurt. Her voice was steady, almost casual, like someone making a threat wrapped in silk, like someone absolutely convinced they still held the leash. "You'll regret this," she said, as if regret was something I hadn't been dragging behind me like a rusted chain for 30 straight years. "Don't forget I know things. I remember everything you wrote in that little diary." That last part, it was meant to sting, to shake me, to push me right back into that old, familiar corner where I apologized for things I hadn't done and begged for forgiveness I didn't know. But it didn't work this time, because she didn't know the truth. Not really. I pressed delete and watched the message disappear like a body sinking into deep water. No dramatic music. No gasp of satisfaction. Just silence. I'd already done the hardest part a month ago, before the baptism, before the whisper, before everything cracked in two. I had found the journals, the real ones, the ones that told the actual story, not the sanitized versions I'd left in the drawer. I had taken every raw, unfiltered page, the good and the brutal, the moments where I wanted to be a mother, and the ones where I wasn't sure I could survive my own mind, and I sealed them into a fireproof lockbox. Not in the closet. Not under the bed. I pulled up the loose floorboard beneath the nightstand in Claire's nursery and placed them there, covered them with a folded blanket and then a soft rug, like I was burying something holy. The ones I left in the drawer, the ones she read, those were bait. I had rewritten pages from memory, swapped out details, included a few dark exaggerations I knew she wouldn't be able to resist. I filled them with little landmines, thoughts about not trusting Matt, notes about feeling unsafe with the baby, even one entry that mentioned considering whether I should have ever had Clare at all. All lies. And all written in my old handwriting, in an old journal she wouldn't know wasn't authentic. I had left them there on purpose, weeks before she went snooping, because some part of me already knew she would. I had stopped expecting respect from her a long time ago. What I wanted now was confirmation. Proof. She walked straight into it. And I never said a word. That was the beauty of it. No confrontation, no screaming match, no storming out of the house or dramatic declarations. Just erasure. Just absence. Just silence so thick it turned her noise into background static. I didn't respond to the threats. I didn't acknowledge the letter she later slipped into the mailbox without a stamp. I didn't even bring her up in therapy anymore. She wanted to be at the center of my story. So I wrote her out of it. But here's the thing they don't tell you about revenge. Not the cold kind. Not the long game, meticulous kind. It doesn't feel like victory. It feels like standing in an empty room with no one left to fight. It feels like staring at a wall you finally tore down, only to realize it was holding up a roof. It feels like freedom soaked in grief. I didn't feel proud. I felt bruised. And alone. And hollow in a way that even Claire's laughter couldn't fully patch up, though she tried. God, she tried. Every giggle from her crib, every squeal when Matt lifted her high into the air, it all reminded me that this was the why. That silence had protected her, even if it starved something inside me. One night, a week after the voicemail, I sat in the nursery, Clare heavy in my arms after a long evening of teething and tired crying. The rocking chair creaked with every movement, soft and rhythmic, like the house was breathing with me. Her little fist rested against my collarbone, her mouth finally relaxed in sleep, and I leaned down and whispered into the tiny curve of her ear, "You'll never hear that voice like I did. Not once. I promise." That promise, it's the one thing I've held onto like a rope, pulling myself through every wave of doubt and pain and uncertainty. Not because I know I'll be perfect. I won't be. I'll yell when I'm exhausted. I'll mess up meals and forget playdates and probably cry in the bathroom more than I should. But I'll never weaponize her pain. I'll never make her feel like love is conditional. And I will never, ever make her beg to be enough. A few days later, I got a letter in the mail, no return address, just my name in that perfectly neat handwriting that made my stomach tighten without even opening the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Not a threat. Not an apology. Just one page, torn from the fake journal, and a photo of me as a baby, probably no more than 6 months old, wrapped in a yellow blanket I didn't recognize. The back of the photo had a single line scrawled in red ink: "History always finds its way back." That's the moment I realized I might never be done with her. That silence doesn't always mean safety. That, even when you lock the door, some people find a way in through the cracks. Maybe she never read the real journal. Maybe someone else did. Maybe I'd invented an enemy so elaborate I couldn't tell where her voice ended and mine began. Maybe I didn't cut the cord. Maybe I just tightened it.